On this episode of Somewhere in the Skies, we're joined by filmmaker Luigi Vendittelli.
We have real, verifiable, reproducible evidence that is 100%. 100%. I'm saying this publicly. That proves something Bob Lazar said in 1989, that there would be no fucking way in hell that he would have known that, or any of us would have known that in 1989. And it is impossible to argue. It's tangible. It's verifiable. It wasn't leaked to us. It's public. We discovered it through public. It's going to clearly make a lot of noise, because if he was lying, there's no way he would have known this. No way.
Luigi breaks down his year-long collaboration with Bob Lazar and the creation of his film, S4, The Bob Lazar Story. From becoming the youngest MUFON member ever to working alongside researchers tied to the Ariel School incident, Luigi shares how a lifelong obsession with UFOs led him to one of the most controversial figures in the field, and ultimately inside Lazar's world. Luigi reveals how he worked directly with Lazar to reconstruct the alleged S4 facility in extreme detail, building a full 3D environment of the hangars, corridors, propulsion lab, and even the surrounding Papoose Lake landscape. He recounts how Lazar began remembering new details during the process, and describes powerful moments where Lazar was visibly shaken after virtually walking through the recreation. That aligns with Lazar's 1989 statements, as well as the intense pushback he faced, including legal demands for his private communications with Lazar, with modern whistleblowers echoing Lazar's claims about reverse engineering programs. This episode dives deep into whether Lazar's story is finally being validated, and what this new film, S4, The Bob Lazar Story, could reveal next. But before we get to that conversation, I want to send a special thanks and shout out to our brand new Patreon subscribers: Timothy H., Brenda F., Corbin S., Ernest P., and Mothman's Uncle. If you'd like to become a Patreon subscriber and get rewards in return, visit patreon.com/somewhereskies. Thank you so much for your support. And while you're at it, please take just a few moments to rate and review Somewhere in the Skies on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. It truly helps us gain visibility and find new curious minds. Head on over to Apple Podcasts and Spotify and rate and review today. But for right now, let's learn more about S4, The Bob Lazar Story, with its creator and director, Luigi Vendittelli.
While our government's official position is not to speculate on this subject, we can choose to let our minds explore other possibilities, to use our imaginations. For if we consider that astroscientists agree on one point, that the possibility of life elsewhere is not only quite probable, some feel it is there without a doubt. Let us suppose then that these objects are real space vehicles, extraterrestrial in origin, and not an illusion of the mind.
This is Somewhere in the Skies with Ryan Sprague.
Welcome to Somewhere in the Skies, and a first-time welcome to our guest today, Luigi. Thank you so much for joining us on Somewhere in the Skies.
Thank you, Ryan. It's great to be here.
Now, you and I have been in this field for a while, man. We were talking off air about what has changed in the decades that we have been studying UFOs. But if there's one thing that hasn't changed for me, it is the story of Bob Lazar, one of the most consistent stories in ufology, one that I have followed for a really long time. Obviously, you have as well. We're going to talk
Yeah.
all about your upcoming film that's coming out, S4, the Bob Lazar story.
Yep.
But that is a story in itself. The journey that this
Oh yeah.
project has had, right?
Hell of a story. Yeah. Yeah.
um before we get to that though, man, for any of our viewers, our listeners who may be unfamiliar with your work, let's catch them up. Can you kind of give us your background? What got you interested in UFOs, the origin story? I know
Of
you've probably
course.
told this a million times, but
Yeah. I'll try to
you
make it
hold
short. Yeah.
yeah, right, the Cliff Notes version. But I was reading this today. You hold the record for something in MUFON as well.
Yeah.
In terms of that, can you tell us about that?
That was back in 87 or 80. I can't find my original letter because I have a letter. I have all my other letters, but I can't find the original. So it's either late 87 or early 1988. I found out about MUFON. I was in Canada. I was really interested in flying saucers. I was interested in flying saucers because my grandfather had seen a flying saucer. So, as you know, I'm Italian, born Italian Catholic, very traditional, very religious family that I had in my upbringing. Also grew up part of my life in Rome, and that was not a topic of conversation in the family, let alone in the community. Nobody talked about flying saucers. So my grandfather, being very traditional, who kept saying he saw a flying saucer, caught my attention as a kid. And I remember, he was like a very important person in my life. I considered him to be probably one of the foundational people of how I became what I've become in my life. And I said, he doesn't lie. He wasn't a liar. He wasn't a person. He wasn't somebody who ever wanted to have attention. He's very low key, and he kept insisting that he had seen a flying saucer. So it got my attention. I got so interested that I wanted to find out everything about them. And here in Montreal, I was living in Montreal, born in Montreal, um, and I couldn't find anything about flying saucers back then, especially like early '80s. So I thought if I buy a bunch of astronomy or space books, I'll find out about aliens, which was false. All your reading is about planets and stuff. And I eventually found out that there was an organization called MUFON. I think my mom drove me and my sister and my grandmother. I remember from Montreal, there's a place called Plattsburgh, New York. It's not too far away. So we drove to Plattsburgh, New York, and at the time, the mall in Plattsburgh, New York was really cool. Like they had all these stores that we didn't have in Montreal. So we always wanted to go there just to buy stuff that we could get in America that you couldn't get in Canada. And so I remember something, I don't remember where I saw it, but I remember I saw something about MUFON there. So I took it back with me to Montreal, and I sent them like the application and all that. And when they responded, I received a letter, and it was from a guy called Walt Andrus, which was the head of MUFON at the time. And he said, you're the youngest person who's ever applied to be a member of MUFON. I remember I had that.
Nice.
And I was like, oh shit, that I was like, maybe I'm too young for this. I started getting intimidated, thinking that I had to do something, and I didn't. But I thought I had to, by doing, you're innocent, you don't know. So
Yeah.
I got my first card, and he said, you're the official youngest member of MUFON in the world. So I remember that being a thing, and that got me really started. I started receiving the MUFON journal, the MUFON journal that they would send out, and I started through that, trying to locate where to buy the right books. I was a geek, dude. I was a geek. I was a full-on geek. I was not interested in girls or going out playing soccer, whatever. I was just full-on wanting to find out, about aliens. And so I really geeked out, and I bought a whole bunch of books, and I got really interested, and I would eventually start going to these little get-together. They were not MUFON conferences. They were like local chapter MUFON things. And I was like 13, I think. So my dad would have to drive me, and he was concerned, like, where are you going? All these people have white hair, because everybody had white hair, and it was just weird for him to like see his son, and so he would stay just to make sure that it's, what the hell is this?
All right.
And but he was very supportive, and eventually, one of the first things I actually really dove deep into was communicating with Ed Walters from Gulf Breeze, Florida. I don't know if you
Oh,
remember
wow.
that.
Oh,
Yeah.
buddy, yes, I do.
Yeah.
What a
And
story.
I couldn't believe it. I wrote him a letter and I said, I thought that to validate myself, I would have to say I'm with MUFON. I thought that was a validation. So I said, I'm with MUFON and I'm in Montreal. I'm really interested in your case and blah, blah, blah. So I sent him a letter. He sent me back a package which had a videotape, which I still have, of him talking to me on videotape, and then sent me copies of the original tapes of what he had filmed and letters and stuff. And that was the first time I was like going like, oh, this is so cool. Like this is like, and I guess that started me on this whole journey. But it's been like anybody who would have been interested in that back then. It's like it's a side note. It's like it's part of your life, but it's not what you do. I had to go to school and I was studying, and eventually the older I got, the more I wanted to date girls, and that was not a cool topic to bring up back then. If you believed
Nope.
in UFOs and aliens, that wasn't going to get you on a date. So I started like not talking about it for a while so I could have a normal life. And then eventually, yeah, I would do it like I would read about it secretly. And then eventually publicly, I started saying, you know what? I like this stuff. I don't care. I'm going to say I like this stuff. So obviously, like a lot of us, got a lot of flack from a lot of people. Even friends of the family used to think there was a problem with Luigi because he likes aliens too much. And so that was how I started. And eventually, after many years, and I'm cutting out a lot, I eventually became national director for MUFON in Canada, and I pretty much was in charge of basically what MUFON does is taking in all the reports and filtering through and basically dispatching anybody who would have to go out. And I did that for a while until I got really, honestly, real bored of it because it's the same thing. You get so many people who see something. It's really, I'm not saying it's not real. I'm saying you can't do anything with it. Somebody will call, do you have a picture of it? No, but I want to report it. Or you have a video of it? Yeah, but you can't see anything. And that was like 95% of it or more. So it kind of got tiring or telling people you just saw Venus. It's just
Right.
Venus. You didn't see anything. Some people would think the moon is moving. The moon is not moving, dude. So it's like, so there was a lot of that, and I got really tired of that. It became monotonous, and took a step away from that. And I think it was early on in the 2000s or mid 2000s. 2005 or something, I can't remember. I was in China and I was coming to Canada and China at the same time, and I started really getting back into it, and eventually that got me to get to know people that were involved with the Ariel School incident in Rua in
Mhm.
Zimbabwe. So I eventually became very close to one of the witnesses. Her name was Emily Trim. She passed away a year and a bit ago. She had become a really close friend of mine. I had become really close with Randall Nickerson, who produced the documentary Aerial Phenomenon, and that kind of took a lot of years in my life. I was really working with Emily on trying to figure out what had happened there and things that happened to her and other kids after, and that got me very interested in the. I was always interested in abductions, but I was not. I was well educated, self-educated by reading books, but that's just what just reading books. I eventually was fortunate enough through a friend who is called Don Dondaries, professor at McGill here, who's wrote about this, who was very close friends with John Mack and with David Jacobs. And John was already gone. And so connected me to David Jacobs, and I eventually was his apprentice for 2 years. So David basically did a lot of I spent a lot of time with David learning about the abduction cases. He told me all about what Bud Hopkins was doing throughout the years and all that. And I was fortunate enough one time at David's house to see all of Bud Hopkins' work because it was at David's house. And I was fascinated with it, and eventually realized that I was not going to be a good um, hypnotist, do a regressive hypnosis. I was going to be very good at uh, basically tracking data, but not hands. If you go into the abduction field, it's kind of synonymous with having to learn how to do regressive hypnosis. I'm not made for that, so I stepped away. I said, this is not something I'm going to be good at doing. I don't know how to do it well, but I know how to track data. I know how to connect things, and so I did a lot of that. And through my friendship with Emily, I eventually realized, I had realized it in the past, but realized it more, that the field required a sort of an ethical standard. The field, I should rephrase that, not the field. The topic was still being ridiculed, even though the nuts and bolts was being ridiculed less. So if people were accepting of the fact that somebody could have seen an object, even a Navy pilot seeing an object, that's still nuts and bolts. You're seeing an object, it's flying, it's technology. We don't know what it is. That's a very big step away from I saw a being was here in my present. That's not the same. So there was a big distinction there, and also a big distinction in how society reacted to it. And so if you had a lot of people open to the possibility that, yeah, it's possible that somebody saw something in the sky, that was great to see, this openness with people. But you could still sense a pretty closed gap with mainstream when it came to possible contact. And that made me look at this, and I eventually wanted to start a movement at the time with Emily when she was alive, and it was going to be called the WANA movement. We are not alone. The first four letters is WANA. And the WANA movement was simply to raise awareness to the fact that it is possible that people have seen something. They do not know what it is, and it affected them emotionally. It affected their lives, and we should be very cautious in ridiculing it or laughing it off as if it's nonsense right away, because that could be further trauma to that person. And
Right.
that was something that I took very seriously. Excuse me. So it kind of made me step away from the daily investigations or the investigative work, and I started thinking about the human aspect of this phenomenon. And I thought, we need to kind of just talk about it. And of course there's always going to be those who embellish or want to have attention, and they'll bring out, stupid things out there, make us believe whatever. But then there's the real people in there, and they have real feelings, and they're real humans who have, families and friends and jobs. So it became the number one priority for me. And that was at the end where then COVID started, and I had already started WANA, and Emily was well, and we were going to do something about that. She was going to be our spokesperson because she had been a witness to Ariel. She was there,
Yeah.
and she had gone through a tremendous amount of personal attacks throughout her life because they thought that was crazy. There's no way, aliens don't exist. You imagined it, so did the other kids. So COVID arrived. Obviously, everything kind of froze. And while I was kind of stuck, not being able to do anything because I couldn't go. They even had curfews in Quebec, where I live here in Montreal, so you couldn't even leave. I decided. I said, let me do a full deep dive on the Bob Lazar story, just for fun. I
Just for
just want
funsies.
to, let me just really do a deep dive.
Nice.
And I did. And I started pulling all. I said, let me see what's online, like what's out there, right? And there was so much stuff. I mean, there's so much stuff on Lazar. It's crazy. And
Yeah.
you have to be like, you have to really be good at remembering stuff, because information was varying from one site to the next or whatever you read. And that kind of that kind of struck a chord, because I'm like, I don't know which website's telling me the truth here, because one's saying this, the other one's saying that, and what's real. And long story short, I started getting more and more interested in the story. Jeremy Corbell had done his movie in 2018 and had been on Rogan with Bob, which I found that to be great, because Bob came out again in the spotlight, and I thought, oh, this is cool, and I knew the story since I was a kid. Obviously, everybody who I was there when I was a kid when it happened, but I remember I was already I believe I was already with MUFON when that happened, and so I was starting to take notes. I remember when you see the cliche thing of like having a board and writing notes, and so I started like creating a thing where it's like, okay, this is what happened. That's what he saw. This, but I started getting more interested in the story of what he had seen at S4, more so than the story of how to validate who he is as a person. And the reason why is I said, look, I've known about this guy for, I don't know, 20 some, at the time it's 30 years or something. I I've also seen all this information out there that has to do with his past, and it's been out there forever. A lot of people have done a lot of great work in that. And but every time we had to talk about what he saw and exactly describe what he saw, it was always vague. I'd never seen something really accurate. And I'm thinking, this guy was he was like touching the material. I mean, he's handling it. So obviously we need to have very clear specs here. I mean, he was inside the craft, right? So that's not something that you heard all the time. If I had to think about another person who consciously remembered being inside a craft, would have been Travis Walton, that woke up inside a craft and ran around and tried to get away. But that was not he was not analyzing components like, let's say, what Lazar claimed to, being inside this vehicle.
Right.
So I found that to be really of interest, and I thought, you know, in the field, and I'll take a quick. I also, parallel to all this, I'm a president of a merchandising company. So I run merchandise. I've been running merchandise for 25 years. So I know how to make stuff, by the way. Just FYI, I can make products, right? So I've done that for 25 years. And that's one of the reasons why I was in China, to learn how to make stuff. So, and so I thought, never have we ever seen a professional scale model of a vehicle from another civilization, supposedly from another civilization, that is accurate. It's always kind of, or it's about like that, but never something precise. And I'm obsessed with precision, by the way. I'm kind of known for that. So I thought, how interesting would it be to create something that is extremely precise, a model of a vehicle that is possibly a real vehicle from another star system, but with precision. And I thought, who do I contact? Which one would it be? Well, it's if I thought about it, it wouldn't have been Travis, because he really didn't have time to analyze the components. You could not rely on abductees, because it's far too difficult for that to be considered accurate information. It's very vague. They're scared, or they don't remember. But Lazar is the only person we know, especially historically, that described this from a perspective of a study, of an analysis. So I thought, I wonder if he would be open to doing anything on this. And I reached out on a whim. I decided to pick up the phone. I found the company that his company, reached out, spoke to Zach, who works with him at United Nuclear. That's his company. I said, look, you guys don't know who I am. This is my company. I sent the website. I said, I've been making stuff for a long time. I'm really good at making things, tangible objects, whatever they are. I'd love to make a replica, a collector version of that flying saucer. I would love to have Bob Lazar to make sure that I'm doing it the right way. Whether people believe it or not doesn't matter. It's still that story. And I said, and I would love to have his seal of approval. I said, I could possibly do it with the information that is out there, but it would be so much more valuable if I had his stamp of approval on it. And so, Zach said, I don't know if he's going to talk to you. I don't know if he has time. Or I said, I understand that. I'm not expecting anything. And long story short, he decided to give me a call. Oh, sorry. Zach called me and said, Bob would talk to you. He saw your website, and you do seem like somebody who's done quite a few things in the past. I said, I have. It's not a secret. So I eventually got on the phone with Bob maybe a day later, and it was the first time I spoke to him. So for me, it was also as a person in this field, to talk to Bob Lazar was just a cool thing.
Yeah.
Just hey Bob, I'm a fan regardless. I think the name Bob Lazar also sparks nostalgia for me because it's when I started getting interested in flying saucers. So, it there's a certain part of that is also nostalgic that made me, want to talk to him because I'm like, my God, this is a name I've heard since I was a kid. And so we started talking, and he realized that I knew what I was talking about. He started asking me like, well, if you would do that, how would you go about in making this? And so, long story short, he said, "You sound like you know what you're doing." And I said, I do, Bob. I genuinely would take this very serious. I would do a very professional job at this. I would not insult the project. I would make a professional model." He says, "Fine, you can come and see me." And so I bought a ticket the next day. I was like, "Look, if Bob Lazar is saying come and see me, I'm not gonna take a chance and make that possibly change. I'm gonna go and see him." So I went out there, and I brought, my God, Ryan, I brought like, oh, here we have like all this area where whenever we're creating prototypes of stuff, we have like material samples, textures, colors. I have all this kit that we use. Put all that in my luggage and went out there. I said, if I'm going to build a craft, I'm going to bring everything I have. And so I went out there, and him and I sat. He invited me to his house the first night to have dinner with his wife and Zach, wonderful people, and talked about life more than anything. And he said, "Do you really think people would be interested in a model of a flying saucer?" I said, "Yeah." And he says, "Wow, you didn't even hesitate." I said, "No, Bob." I go, "This is you're sort of a unique individual, and we can't seem to, put that story away. It's a really important story." I go, "I know there's a lot of controversy around it, but you're still Bob Lazar. You still said that, and a lot of stuff seems to align in some senses." So he said, "All right." So we sat down for 2 days. I took down so many notes. I mean, measurements and he was so kind and trying to help as much as he could. And I had brought with me a tester's model back in '94. The Testers Corporation had made a plastic model of that craft. It's available on eBay for people who want to collect it. It's a collector edition, and it's not a good quality model, but it's pretty accurate. And so I brought that with me, and I wanted to know from Bob, is this good? Like, can I also use this? And he pointed out everything that was good and everything that was not. So he says, this is good, but this is actually inaccurate. So I made notes everywhere, and at least that was a framework, kind of part of the framework, and came back to Montreal, spent 2 months with my team, and we did a pretty big job and created a 200-page book on the craft, technical page book on the
Yeah,
craft.
yeah.
And I had hundreds of questions for him that I had not realized that I needed to know. And so this sparked me going back to see him with all these questions. And while I was out there, he answered everything. Some of them he didn't know. Like he goes, "I'm sorry, I never measured that, so I would like." There were certain things that we had to like say, okay, impossible to know because he didn't get to see that. But whatever he was able to give us, it was very good. And we eventually, I came back and we eventually built the craft. We started building the craft in 3D in Unreal Engine, and I spent I would close to a year, a little less than a year building just the craft, the framework of the craft, and that took a while. I had I would say in total we were 5 people. I contracted five. I contracted 4 3D experts in to do that, and I had one person in house plus myself to direct it, and then eventually it grew to a bigger team. And while this was happening, I thought, we could build the hangar where it was, housed. And so that sparked conversations with Bob saying, Bob, would you help us, with the hangar so that we can maybe make a box for this thing that looks like the hangar? Anyway, that went from let's make a box for the model to, hey Bob, do you think we could build the whole S4 facility? And he said, look, he goes, if you're going to be investing the money, just make sure you get your money back. He goes, that what, why would you do that? And I said, what if we did this? If we were able to recreate S4, and I mean really recreate S4. I'm not talking about some low quality, low poly recreate. I'm talking high quality stuff. Would you be willing for us to do a small documentary where you would be explaining everything you saw there in the exact way you saw it? And I think that was right before, uh, I can't remember exactly the date that happened, but he thought about it and he thought, Luigi, that's going to cost you a fortune. Like he was worried like, are you sure you want to do this? Because he
Right.
wasn't getting any, like, for him it's like, all you're getting from me is I'm directing you to do this, but what are you sure you're even going to make any money with this? Like, you're going to spend all this money doing, because he saw how much effort it was to just build a craft. And then, anyway, long story short, I said, look, if you tell me it's a go, I will allocate the budget. It's all done in house here, so it's our own money. And I said, we'll do it. And he said, he goes, I don't want to be responsible if this is not a profitable business for you. He says, if you want to do it, know that I've warned you that, nothing says you'll get your money back. I said, I'm okay with that. I know that I'll work on trying to make this, so at least recover our expenses. And so he agreed. And so we started building S4. And then once S4 was built, with the craft, with the other craft, well, whatever he could remember. By the way, we only built what he could remember, what he saw. Okay. So if you're going to see a long corridor, a long hallway in S4. We didn't build past where he went. It's just a corridor, because he said, I don't know what was out there. I just know it was a long corridor, but I never went there. So we kind of had to limit ourselves to that area that he worked in. Built the propulsion lab where he worked, and built a hangar, obviously, the sport model, the briefing room, the nurse station, the hand scanner room, the whole. And then we started building the landscape, the whole Papoose Lake, the Papoose mountain range. And we went so far to go to 10-kilometer wide 3D environment. So couple $1 million later, we now own S4. Okay, so
Wow,
yeah,
man.
yeah. So we
That's
hope people will appreciate the extent we went into in at least doing it. Now, we were also saying, people on my team didn't even know who Bob Lazar was. Okay, so
mm,
when when I started telling everyone we're going to work on this project, this guy Bob Lazar worked on flying saucers at Area 51. I swear, everybody just looked at me like, are you crazy? Like, who? What are you talking about? And I said, do you know who Bob Lazar? And they were like, no, I have no idea who Bob Lazar is. I said, he worked at this facility. And I started explaining it as if, and I forgot that sounded insane to some people. So,
Right, right.
I said there were flying saucers in these hangars, and they literally said, you're kidding, right? Like a flying saucer in a hangar. Like for them, that was like, what are you saying? You know?
Mhm.
So my team came in completely not knowing Bob Lazar, and most of them not believing this at all. Like
Mm.
I'm talking at all. In fact, my sister who works with me, uh, she was like, what are you doing? Like, I know you like this stuff, but what the hell is this all about? This guy working in a place with flying like she was like thinking, are you fucking losing it? Like this is gonna cost so much money, and so I had friction inside, because they're like,
Yeah.
okay, we'll do it, but like, really? So they eventually, obviously, they eventually met Bob. They had to because we had to film with Bob and all that. Everybody was kind of guarded. They were like, who is this guy? Like, I can't wait to meet this guy to see if this guy's for real or not. And and that's part of this whole story is whether people believe Bob Lazar or not, I can't. Nobody can control that. People make their own judgment, but on a human level, I'll speak for what I've seen with my team. All of them today all believe Bob Lazar, and
Wow.
not only do they believe Bob Lazar, but they now defend Bob Lazar, and you can't fool so many people so well. And if he has, wow. Because I got a couple people that work here that are, those people that you could just never fool. They're like an impenetrable, there's no way. That's my sister, by the way. You cannot, there's no way. That I challenge God to doing that, and just nobody's gonna change her mind. And I was like, and she was like, yeah, he's saying the truth. I can't see where he's lying. It just doesn't come across. So does he, some people say, does he believe his own lie? Is he I don't think that's what it is. I really think there's truth to the story. Everybody is familiar with the controversies of Bob Lazar. Everybody knows that there's holes in the story. Can't supply university diplomas. Cannot supply some evidence to some stuff. Had some weird stuff happen back when he was younger. That doesn't seem to have changed their perception of Bob Lazar, especially when it came to what supposedly happened at S4. Um, I I myself have spent 4 years working closely with Bob. In fact, I can say now, after all this time, it's almost 4.5 years. I mean, Bob and his wife Joy have become friends, and you don't just that just doesn't just happen. I have to trust the people, regardless of the fact that it was nostalgic for me to meet Bob or to talk to Bob Lazar. I'm still a very grounded person. I don't bend very easily to whatever. So I found it to be very insightful for me to get the opportunity to know a lot more with Bob, talking to him. I asked him if any question you can imagine somebody would want to ask Bob Lazar, I've asked them that question 5 times over every question. So
Mm.
I've covered that for 4 years, and none of that has ever. There's not a moment where I thought he was lying, but I will say, and I say it publicly all the time, Bob Lazar is not lying. Bob Lazar is omitting information. Okay? So that's it's a distinct difference between he's a liar or he's omitting information. He I am I am certain that he went there and he did witness what he said he witnessed, but I'm also certain there's omissions in the story. Now, I'm not going to press for to know more. He he's openly said he holds back some information. So I know that that's part of that omission. He holds back in case something ever comes out, that if somebody was ever there, they can say something that he can say, okay, that is, that person knows something.
Right.
Right.
It's like a card he can play
Exactly.
if he
So
had to. Yeah.
I completely understand that, and I respect that, and I think that's a fair way of going about it. So I don't think that it's not an intentional uh, trick or something. No, I feel he's genuine. He's saying, I want to hold a few cards just for my own sake in order to validate. A lot of people have said a lot of things after he came public. Oh, I've been to S4, or you don't know. We don't know if that's true. They've only said it after he said S4. Is that real? What do we know?
Right.
So there's apparently stuff that he doesn't want to, put out there. So I find that very interesting, and I think that that's important. He's clearly a very educated person and very talented person in what he does, which is all science related. I personally witnessed it, so I can guarantee everyone it's real. I mean, the guy he does pretty interesting work. Some of his clients are the FBI, so it's not like he has small client lists. He does really complex stuff, scientific work that would require quite some knowledge in order to do. So it's not like he's this, people say he's not really a scientist, or he doesn't know anything about physics, or I don't know. That's not what I saw, but I'm not a physicist myself. So obviously I can't ask the harder questions, but I think he can hold his own. I think he's also said it many times that um that he's not the one they should, like he said, I wasn't even he goes, I don't think I was qualified for doing what they hired me to do out there. He
Right.
says I feel that it should have been a scientific project or some science operation, but he says it didn't feel like that. It felt like a military operation. It felt like it was a military prison, in another way of saying it, because we were being watched all the time. We couldn't speak loudly. We couldn't speak to other groups. We had to whisper stuff to each other. We couldn't look in certain directions, that we had to stay focused. And he goes, that's not a very, he goes, I don't have very good memories of the environment of S4. He goes, of course it was crazy, it was amazing to be there and see this stuff, but he goes, other than that, it was a very stressful place to be at. So he said whatever was happening there was not something he was used to. It was highly secured. So when we were making the film and asking him a bunch of questions, he eventually said, you should know that my story is very boring. It's a very boring, I didn't do anything exciting. It's not like anything happened. And I said, are you kidding?
Yeah.
But he said, he goes, I understand, you guys want to show the craft, and that's cool, but how much craft can you show? Eventually nothing happened. I said, well, that's the whole point, is I think to recreate something that actually happened, as mundane and as how boring you think it could be, it's not something that humanity is accustomed in doing, to be standing in a room that has a vehicle that could be potentially from another star system. And I think that's in itself quite incredible. Now, all the things that were happening because of that, are interesting, regardless of the fact that there was nothing going on. So why were they shouting? I don't know. Why was everything so quiet? Well, I don't know. So, but you want to know those things. You want to see it happen. You want to have a recreation of it so that you can actually, we even in this research field, every time we hear these stories, they're reverse engineering, there's government facilities where they hold craft. And well, I'd love to see what it would look like, but I mean, through the eyes of somebody that was there. I would be very interested in that personally.
Yeah.
I've heard the stories 1,000 times, but I don't want to see a cheap recreation of it, or a quick animation of it, or some creative liberty way of showing it. I want to see exactly what it looked like. And
Yeah.
so that was my motivation. And I think that Bob found that to be uh, interesting once he started seeing it. So once he started seeing it, the really interesting things happened after we had built the whole framework. And I would say we were at maybe 40% of the build, and he started remembering. And that was something that I didn't expect, because he would go into the hangar, he's looking around, and he's like, yeah, that's accurate, that's accurate. And he'd go, oh my God, there used to be a door there. He goes, there's a
Mhm.
door missing, and he goes, I remember now. And you could see it. He's like, I have about 100 Zoom calls with Bob of him going through S4 and going, oh my God, that wasn't there. That was there. And it's like when you go back in your old high school and you
Yeah.
go, oh shit, I forgot. Yeah, that's right. The washroom is down that hall, stupid things, but you remember because you're there. And
Right.
so that was a really cool experience to see that in live, to see him remember things. A lot of things obviously he didn't remember. He said, I would always ask him mundane stuff like, how many lights do you think were on the ceiling? He says, I don't know. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I had to build it, so I didn't know how many. I would say, do you remember the height of the pillar? He's like, I have no idea. He's like, whatever that is. He goes, I wasn't paying attention to that. I was paying attention to the
Right.
craft. So, and plus I wasn't even allowed to look around. I wasn't even allowed to turn my head. So there's a lot of things that I remember. In Obviously I was paying attention, but we were always escorted by military. So by these guards. So it was he goes, there's a lot of things you're going to have to take creative liberty on. I said, what was the color of the floor, in the hangar? He says, it must have been gray. He goes, if I remember, plus he goes, I don't remember what I had for lunch yesterday. So you're asking me something that I don't remember, so there's a few things that we obviously had to fill in the gaps to build the whole facility. But when we finished, and we gave Bob a tour, you had to be there. It was, I can't even put it into words. He was visibly shaken. You could see that it brought back emotions. He said, I never thought I would see this again. He said, you guys really did it. He goes, this is S4. This is what it looked like. And he goes, you got the lighting right. Because we spent, I mean, I didn't spare any expense, by the way. So as long as I make some money back, good. I want everybody to know that this whole project was to try to get it to be as historically accurate as possible. Of course, there's an entertainment component of it, but I wanted to use technology to create a piece of history. Whether you believe it or not, that's the story that was told. So this is what that story is. I don't think that it's going to I don't think that it's going to hurt to have people see it, to possibly connect the dots better. I mean, you have people that have known Bob all his life. I mean, his wife, Joy, after she saw the movie, she said, "Luigi, I'm married to Bob Lazar, and I learned a lot in your film." I She said, "I didn't realize it was exactly like that. Now I understand it better when Bob tells me."
Mhm.
And Mario Santa Cruz, who's a good friend of Bob, just called us yesterday. He just saw the movie yesterday, and it was interesting. He kept me on the phone for almost an hour, and he said, "Luigi, I've known Bob since this happened. I've known that story like the back of my hand since this happened because Bob had told us." He says, "I learned so much stuff because it's so different when you see something, because you finally understand the little nuances, the little differences. You go, oh, that's what he meant. It's I've had I did a lot of research on this, and I had all these points that were pointing to the possibility that the story was fabricated. And I wanted to see if these points would get resolved. And they did. I know we're going to have a book come out eventually. We're going to have all this stuff in a book format as well. How we made it, how we did it, how it's all the technical details. And there were things that he had said that would only be able to be seen in a real physical environment.
Mhm.
And because we built it, we are able to actually physically go there. We could, by the way, we used our environment to make a film, but we're also going to be using our environment later this year to release a VR experience where you can actually walk through S4 yourself.
Oh my God.
Okay?
That's so cool.
Yeah, so that's going to happen. And so there was a few things he had mentioned that I wanted to validate myself. The first one, and we laugh about it now, is he had said that there was a reversed American flag on the craft that was stuck on the craft.
Hmm.
This he had said many years ago. I remember even when I was young, I was like, they had an American flag on the craft. Like, why would that be? It made no sense, right? And he said that all the time. He says, I don't know. I saw it. It was there. I mean, it was on the craft. And so I was interested in the American flag, and he had seen it the first time he ever walked in the hangar, and the first time he saw the craft. One of the things that caught his attention was the reversed American flag. And when we built it, I remember I had Chris here who works with me, who, by the way, is Christopher Matteau, is my right hand in this. He's a magician in what he does. He's incredible. We had the craft. I put the goggles on, and I'm in the hangar, and I'm looking at the craft. And the first thing I wanted to see is, can I see the flag? Because online, when I was initially in 2020 or 2021, whenever I started researching, I had read a lot of people saying there's no way you could have seen the American flag from what he's talking about, from the way the angle is. There's no way. It's impossible. He's lying, blah, blah, blah. I was curious because I said, it is kind of an interesting angle. I want to see if he could have seen the flag. And you have to build it to see it. You can't just imagine it. Anyway, I essentially looked over at the craft, and I remember first thing I saw was the American flag. And I remember my team thought I was going to comment on the hangar because we were looking at the hangar. And the first thing I said is, there it is. And they're like, there what is? Like, what are you talking about? I said, the flag. And they thought I was talking about a flag in the hangar.
Mhm.
And they're like, what flag? I said, on the craft. And it took them a second to figure out I was looking to see, is it possible to see the flag? So it might not be one of those things where everybody gets convinced because those are mundane things, but there were so many of those that we had to be in the environment to validate if what he said made sense. And when I built the craft and I went inside the craft, and I saw he said certain physical limitations inside the craft. It's very it's it although it's a wide object, it's very tapered, so it's very angled. So you have to crouch down because of the way the disc is made. So you're pretty much on your hands and knees until you get to the middle, and then you can stand up. And even at that, your head is touching the ceiling. It's very small. I mean, it wasn't made for a 6 foot adult. It's not made for that. And those are things that I saw only after we built it. And I thought, how would he know that? How would he know those little subtleties? Because they're little subtleties that he said on the fly, like naturally. Like, yeah, I had to crouch down. Barry went on one side, and I had trouble because it was so tight there. And how would you know it was so tight there if you didn't go there? And I was there now because I built it, and I'm like, oh my god, it's so tight. Even looking at it on screen didn't look tight, and then I'm there in VR, and I'm like, it's tight. It's oh shit. How would he know that? So those were little things that always kept coming up during this whole process, and I thought, you know, he would be he's really good if this is all made up. This is incredible.
Luigi, what were some of in the recreations? Now, this is like the big sort of
Mhm.
thing of the film. We've seen clips of it. We're all going to see all of it
All of
very
it,
soon.
yeah, yeah, of course.
Um, what were some of the most powerful moments with Bob and the recreations where
Yeah,
you said he was visibly
yeah,
shaken? Now, we don't want to give away everything, obviously,
yeah,
but like, from the room where the files were to the Element 115 to the reactor or the core
yeah,
of it,
yeah, yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
propulsion. Like, what are the things that really stand out that people are going
That,
to be like, oh my God?
that people are gonna be oh my god, or that he was oh my god.
Let's do both. Let's do Bob
Okay,
first, and
okay.
then what you're hoping people will see.
So
Yeah.
for Bob, there was three things. Two things happened earlier on. The last thing was the film itself. So when he walked in the hangar the first time, sorry, not the first time, when we finalized it,
Mhm.
and we had the hangar door open. Now keep in mind everything works. So physics work, light works, time of day works. So if it's morning, the sun is at a specific angle and the light is coming in differently than if it's late afternoon. So there's a different, if the hangar door is open, the lighting in the hangar is a little bit different depending on the time of day. So I was switching from time of day in my goggles for him to see different times of day.
Mhm.
And I was at his house, and there was a friend of theirs that was in the living room. He was with me in the kitchen, and that not sorry in the kitchen, in the dining room area. And I said, Bob, check this out. It's a different time of day. And it was he hadn't put the goggles on because I had just arrived, so he puts the goggles on, and he stayed very quiet. And I remember he crouched, he put both his fists like this, and he's looking around. It kind of went like this, and I and he looked like he was worried or something, and I thought, shit, I fucked something up. Like, I mean, I must have. He doesn't look like he's impressed. Usually he would go, wow, that's pretty cool. He wasn't saying anything, and he was looking around, and he took the goggles off and handed them to me, and he says, I need a moment. That really did something to me. And I remember the woman that was there, was a friend of theirs. She looked over and got like, "Are you okay, Bob?" He goes, "That brought back feelings that I never thought I would have again." And you could see it was like he was visibly shaken. And it was a specific time of day. I did it on purpose because of the way the light bounced into the hangar. So I wanted him to see how we could play with daylight, and I wanted him to see that. And it just so happened that he says that matched a time where I saw the craft in there. And that really freaked me out. He goes, because for a second, I didn't. I didn't realize I was in a 3D environment. I thought I was there. And so that was to me, that was equally was it great and also concerning because I saw how it affected him. And he kept repeating that to me that whole day. He says, I can't believe you brought those emotions back in me. I thought those were dead. He said, I thought those were gone, long gone. And he says, it makes me realize how that place messed with me while I was there, because it was so not fun to be there because of all the stress that was happening with the guards and the security. So you could see, I mean, if he was faking some type of emotional trauma, I don't think he was. I really think it was a genuine human response to seeing something that traumatized. And the woman also said she knew him very well. She goes, I I could tell he was shaken by that. So that was the first time that I saw a real emotional. The second time was when we showed him the hallway, and it was right at the entrance where the doors open and there's the hallway in the base. And he put the goggles on and he said, "Oh my God." He goes, "Wow." He didn't know how to respond. He was just like, "That's it." He goes, "You got the lighting accurate too." He goes, "You got the neon lights accurate to the not neon the fluorescent lights." I said, I followed your instructions, man. I go, we really took the time to get the right luminosity, the right tubes, the type of light they would emit. I mean, we really went far, by the way. We really went detailed. And he said, you got this, man. He goes, that was eerie to be back in that hallway, because that hallway was almost like he never went. He was I was never one time in that hallway by myself. There was always armed guards next to me, so I felt like a prison in that hallway. It's like when you're going from one cell to another. He goes, it was so stressful to walk with them because they would always say eyes forward and hands by your side. Like, do not look anywhere. It was like a constant, like, okay, I got it. Like, I don't, I'm not going to look anywhere. But they kept saying it all the time. So clearly that shook him as well. I guess it's just a memory of something. Okay. And then as far as another thing is when we have the test flight that he witnessed, that he only saw in the film. I didn't have a way to show that. It was the final cut of the film. We had that test flight. I kept talking to him about it while we were making it, and he's like, "Send it to me," and I'm like, "No, I don't want to send it to you. I want to,
No.
I want to finish this." So when he saw it, he said, "Wow." He goes, it's so perfect. He goes, that it's weird. It's incredible that technology has gotten that good. He kept
Wow, yeah.
insisting on how technology is really amazing. We could really do incredible things now that we couldn't do before. And I said, yeah, that's kind of the whole purpose, right? Is to use technology and to create historical record with it so that we could recreate something visually. I think that's a missing piece, even though we all, and so that those are the things that basically made Bob Lazar freak out. Now, as far as the crowd's concerned, as far as the audience is concerned, we have evidence. We have a piece of evidence that's going to be released in our film. We have real, verifiable, reproducible evidence that is 100%, 100%. I'm saying this publicly, that proves something Bob Lazar said in 1989, that there would be no fucking way in hell that he would have known that, or any of us would have known that in 1989. And it is impossible to argue. It's tangible, it's verifiable. It wasn't leaked to us, it's public. We discovered it through public. it's going to clearly make a lot of noise, because if he was lying, there's no way he would have known this. No way. So so regardless of every single thing someone could say about Bob Lazar, this is something. So I'm very confident about it. Okay. And there's another complementary piece of evidence that we will be showing that complements that piece of evidence, that is also verifiable, reproducible, publicly available. And following my film, I will be releasing a secondary short episode, because we discovered something else that didn't make it in the film, that is a complete oversight of the United States government. They missed something really big, really big. And we discovered it too late, so we were like, shit, we can't stop the movie now. It actually, I think the movie was like already far gone, and we've discovered it. And I can say that there are things that are coming out that are proving that whatever Bob said in 1989, obviously, like, I'm going to repeat myself, does not prove that there were flying saucers there. But it does prove something so incredibly important, so impossible to find out back then, that it proves to me that he had been there, at least, because it lined up at 100% to exactly what he said, because we built it. Okay.
Right.
So it's 100%. It's not maybe, it's not, oh, it's potential. No, it's clear as day. So that's going to be in the film. And I'm looking forward to the public's response to it. I can't wait for the public to dive deeper into it, because I certainly exhausted in diving deep on this. So I want people to dive deeper, and please do it. We're just really happy to show it and release it and say, this is real. Find out what else is real around there. Okay. So it's clear that there's going to be a lot of noise around it. I'm excited about it. So is my team. Everybody, when we discovered it, it was, I can't say his name yet. It was somebody reached out to us to show it to us. And at first, I didn't want to believe it, because it was too good. I was like, there's just no way. And I thought, there's just no way. And we verified it. And we were like, oh my God. It was one of those, wow. And I showed it to Bob, and Bob literally went like, holy shit. Like, he just went, now that's a massive piece of evidence. Like, that's like, it's there. So we thought, okay, this is going to make noise. And then we want people to go and do their own research, their own take. I mean, I want as many eyes as possible on it, every expert there is on it, to go and deep dive into all that, because there's so much to see. So it's going to be interesting, let me tell you.
Ooh, baby, stay tuned. And
Yeah.
that'll be released after the release of the film.
No. It's in the film.
It's in the film.
It's in the film.
Got it.
There's an additional piece to it,
Okay.
that unfortunately I wasn't able to put in the film.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Got it, Luigi.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for clarifying that. I've got two last questions for you before we move to some listener questions.
Sure.
If that's cool. You had mentioned, like, today, modern ufology, we're living in a world where now we've had 3 congressional UFO hearings, a Senate intelligence meeting. We've got AARO, a Pentagon UFO office. all of these quote unquote whistleblowers coming forward now
Yeah,
saying there are legacy reverse
yeah,
engineered
yeah.
UFO programs, as Bob Lazar said back in
Said,
the 80s.
yeah.
So, how do you wrestle with that mirroring of what Lazar experienced back then? What's going on today? Does it bolster Bob Lazar? Does it discredit what he has said? Is there controversy, like contradictions there? What do you make of what Bob Lazar experienced and what's going on today?
It's really hard to make that connection without also looking at what has been said about Bob Lazar from some of those whistleblowers, right?
Okay.
So you have it, and this is where I kind of have my I'm very guarded. Like I'm very careful at this point because I don't want to. I don't know these whistleblowers. I've met one, by the way, in the time that I've been making this film. Somebody very important who was in Congress. I had actually had an opportunity to meet with two of them that were in Congress, but I had an opportunity to really talk in great detail with one in a private environment and private place with where there was no all the phones and everything were put in a microwave and we were supposed to talk privately. um I can say that that person did not tell me that Bob Lazar was not real, that the story was not real. They said there is something there, but we can't mention his name.
Mm.
And that was something that made me go like, okay, fine. I'm intrigued by that. Why? And there's also there are some that are saying incredible things that are very similar to what Bob Lazar said in 1989. I I, I think it's possible that some of them have, in fact, read or looked into this and did get that information, but we have to also think who has actually had hands-on experience on these things. It's different. There's hands-on, and then there's people who've spoken with people who had hands-on and
Correct.
got, you know, second level clearance or something. So there are people that are very credible, and I believe them, that have had some type of information, relayed to them, which I find really interesting. And there's some of those same people that immediately dismiss Bob Lazar. Immediately. Yet they say the exact same things he said, all the way to describing how the propulsion works. Exactly like Bob Lazar said almost 40 years ago. So if Bob Lazar was a fraud, which some of them claim him to be, how would Lazar have known the exact functionality of a propulsion system that matches one to one with what they're saying? I find that to be very interesting.
Mm.
So I think they're not lying, and I'm not saying that they're not trustworthy. I'm very intrigued because I guess I've been involved in this now for 40 years, so it kind of hits me different. This type of stuff hits me in a different way. And I'm just more intrigued on, well, then why do you dismiss Lazar? Like what's that all about? It's not that I don't believe you, and it's not that I don't believe Bob. Why are you dismissing that? Is that specifically to avoid talking about something else? Are we avoiding a piece of information by including Lazar in the conversation? Because you open Pandora's box with Lazar. And so there's a lot more hands-on detail from Lazar than there is from some of the whistleblowers that are coming out. Regardless of that, I still think they're very valid. but I find it very interesting that they wouldn't even explore more on the Lazar, or they wouldn't open themselves to saying, yeah, that's true. He said the same thing. They don't even want to say that when you confront them. Because when you say, but you're saying the same thing he said. He said it 40 years ago. I don't want to talk about Lazar. Well, I know, but that's not the point. I'm not asking you to talk about Lazar. I'm asking you're saying the same thing.
Mm.
It's interesting. I find that if I'm a police officer and I'm investigating a crime, obviously, if you're saying you're corroborating a witness, I'd be like, hold on a second. How do you know that? I don't want to talk about that. Well, no, you're gonna talk about that. Like, we have to know what the hell's going on. So I'm just very fascinated by the omission of of ignoring Lazar, and a lot of them will say, "Oh, it's because people speaking for them." By the way, not them saying it directly. Okay, they'll say, "Oh, they don't want to say Lazar because Lazar brings so much controversy to the conversation. They want to." I can
Yeah.
understand that. Oh, I can totally understand that. But if you come public, if you chose to make a decision to go public and to give your testimony and to say on camera unequivocally the functionality of a propulsion system, and it just so happens to match verbatim what a person you say is a fraud said 40 years ago, and he was the very first to ever say it, you have to be prepared for that question.
Yeah.
You can't pretend you don't know that.
Yeah.
Okay? Somebody
Yep.
must have raised that question. So you have to have a better answer than I don't want to talk about Lazar.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like there has to be a better answer.
Luigi, and you touch on so many things, and I do want to ask you this. We're going to go over to Patreon in just a little bit
Absolutely.
to
Yeah,
answer more
of
listener
course.
questions, where I do want to dig a little bit more into the controversial
Yeah.
aspects
Of
of Bob
Lazar?
Lazar.
Yeah.
But you bring up a good point, and I have wrestled with the Bob Lazar story, as many have for many years, and it is because of some of those
That's
controversies.
right.
Some of our
Absolutely.
questions will be about that.
Yeah.
However, I would argue, just because that does not negate Bob Lazar working at this facility, that
Right.
does not negate the
Right.
story Bob Lazar. People will say, well, if he lied about this, he lied about that. That's not true. That's not
That's
how the
right.
world works.
That's
It's
right.
not how life works.
Hmm.
So Bob Lazar can have a controversial
Hmm.
past. It does not
And
mean,
still, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. That's right.
that what he's saying
Yeah.
about S4
Yeah.
is not true.
Absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I every day I change my mind on Bob Lazar, but I do feel like if this evidence you're saying in your film is true, that we are going to see when the movie
Hmm.
comes out,
Hmm.
verifies what is going on in today's modern
Hmm.
whistleblower world of
Hmm.
UFOs. Um, I think that is really going to make waves, and it is going to make people change their perspective on
It,
Bob
it,
Lazar, and I
there,
look forward to that.
there's no question. In fact, it will not just do that, but I think it's going to have, I hope, my hope is, besides appeasing the people who don't believe Bob Lazar, my hope, and this is something that George Knapp and I talked about, is that it might motivate somebody to want to go out there, somebody in the government. So it might want to motivate somebody to say, all right, well, we're going to go out there and check this out ourselves. Because if there's nothing there, then what's the problem?
Right. Exactly.
If there's nothing there, then okay,
Yeah.
that doesn't matter, right? So I think it would be, uh, it's ambitious for me to think that that could be a possibility, and even if that does become a possibility, it doesn't mean I'll ever find out about it. But I hope someone somewhere who does have the clearance or has access, who says, all right, well, let's go. Let's go see. You don't need to bring a camera with you. You don't need to have a journalist there to do it. But what maybe it can do is it's the beginning of unraveling one piece of a very, very complex
Web.
web. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Good word. Yeah,
Absolutely,
exactly.
man.
Yeah,
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 that's the word that comes to mind when I
yeah.
think of
Web. That's a good
the
point. Yeah.
story. Well, you mentioned someone out there, someone clearances that have you received any like pushback
Oh yeah.
or like threats not to release this or like
Yeah.
anything you could share on that front, or is that
Yeah.
story for
I
another day?
Yeah, that's something that I had a moment about a year ago. I think it was a year ago. I was talking to Jimmy actually at UAP Files. I kind of was going through a really rough time. Yeah, we didn't just get pushback, man. We got hit hard. And I mean, I've been in business for over 25 years, and my company came under attack, like viciously.
Mhm.
And I am not. I don't want to. You know what? I'm not at liberty to get into all the details because there's still a legal thing going on. But I will say that there's definite evidence that I have that I've shared with some people that proves unequivocally that somebody in a very high position somewhere, I don't know where, if it's federal in the Canadian government or the American government, that had ties to our Canadian banking system, tried very hard to shut us down.
Hmm.
And I'm still fighting that. And it was initially, when all this happened, I had my lawyer. It's funny, and now I stay away from saying too much. You're gonna laugh when I say this. My lawyer called me because I called him. I said, "Fucking, there's a fucking problem here." And I'll never forget. He said to me, he goes, "Okay, Luigi, what'd you do?" And I said, I didn't do anything. You know. And so it went as far as me having to get into an argument with him because he says, "Come on, you're Italian. Maybe somebody in your family made some weird transaction somewhere." And I said, "Are you even kidding me right now?" I said, "Are you actually throwing the Italian card into this?"
Sopranos.
Yeah, like for real. I thought, like, you're kidding, right? So he actually didn't believe it because he says, if that's happening to you, that means you did something very bad. And I said, I did not do anything. And the reason why I am confident of that, and I have receipts for that, is that while we were making this film and the VR experience, we were doing both projects at the same time. We were eligible for some really interesting tax credits with the Canadian government. If you work on documentary films or VR experiences, which is virtual experiences, you're eligible for some percentage. You get some tax breaks with the government. But in order for you to do that, you have to get audited. So
Hmm.
we did, and we passed. So I said, I got audited and I passed. So I don't do anything wrong. I wouldn't have done all that and then suddenly decided to go into some criminal activity out of nowhere. It's like,
Right.
check this out. Like, so I didn't do anything wrong, and I have receipts for that. So he said, well, whatever the case is, nobody would come after you like this unless you did something really wrong. And so eventually they sent us a legal document that said, I can't get in. I wish I could get more detail. It's literally said, we demand that you send us all written communications that you've had with Bob Lazar.
What?
I have that on paper. It's a court document
Oh my god.
from the Quebec Supreme Court. I have that on paper. So I'm not inventing this. Okay. So when I showed that to my lawyer, that's when he said, yeah, that's weird. He goes, I've never seen that before. He goes, that's like another level right there. He goes, now I'm because he didn't believe this whole, by the way, he doesn't even believe in flying saucers. So when I told him, I said, I'm working on this thing, he's like, yeah, your flying saucer thing. Like for him, it's like you're crazy, you know,
Right.
and whatever. But he knows me as a businessman. He knows what I've done in the past, and so he's like, all right, whatever, as long as you know you're capable of making a dollar with it, good for you. Anyway, he said that is a strange request.
Very.
Yeah, yeah.
And the fact that it's specifically your correspondence
Specifically,
with Bob Lazar.
it specifically mentions only with Bob Lazar.
Weird.
Yeah, so you can't make that up. I can't invent that. Okay?
Yeah.
So you know, I had a lot of people go like, "Oh, you know, you're trying to make it sound like you're you know somebody who's coming after you, it's bullshit, whatever." I'm like, what am I trying to do here? I'm trying to go against my own company. What am I, crazy or something?
Right.
That's insane. So yeah, we did have problems. We're still fighting them. I'm I could say a lot more. I won't, but it's been a very weird last year and a half, let me tell you. And part
Mhm.
of the reason why we were so delayed was also part of all this. And I really had to stay quiet. I had to stay quiet. My lawyer told me to stay quiet for in order to protect the company and to protect the project. I have a lot of people that work with me here that rely on me, rely on us here to be healthy, whether that be healthy financially, healthy as a company. I don't. I'm not a lone wolf here, so I feel they have families, they have their own lives. I don't want to put any of my people at risk, so I've been very cautious, very careful, and very quiet. But I can tell you that I've never experienced anything like this in my entire career. So I'm happy that we were finally able to get the film past a certain point. I will also say that I'm very happy to say that we were able to circumvent the many landmines that were placed in front of us by very, very dishonest people who call themselves film distributors. Uh, and they also tried to hurt this launch of this film. I can tell you that. I learned a lot from that, and maybe one day I'll say more about that. But there's a lot of very dishonest people out there. We were able to circumvent that, get an incredible deal with Amazon, and it's coming out April 3rd. We're very happy about that. Uncensored and exactly as it should have been. So, very happy to say that. Yeah.
Ah, that's exciting, man. And I mean, all of that work, all that time, sacrifice, everything. It's gonna be April 3rd is gonna be a big day for you. It's gonna
Oh
be a
my
big day
God.
for the UFO community too, man. I mean, the last time we really had Bob Lazar in the limelight was when
When
Corbell's
Jeremy,
film
yeah,
came out.
that's right. Yeah.
And this story keeps building and more of it. It's like the judicial system with the two
Yeah, that's
the
right.
two
Yeah,
uh,
yeah,
scales.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
and I feel every 5 years or so,
Yeah,
the
it just keeps.
validation of Bob Lazar keeps getting heavier and heavier in a good way.
Yeah.
So I'm really looking forward to it. Let's head on over to Patreon to get to
Let's do
these
it. Yeah,
burning
of course.
listener
Yeah, yeah.
questions. But like you mentioned, you have your own streaming service as well. That's going to be the doc will be
Yeah,
on besides Amazon and everything.
right.
So last question. What do you hope people will truly take away from your film S4? And when and where can they find it?
So, okay. Well, what I hope is people enjoy it. I think that the biggest thing I hope they can take away from it is to finally see it in its most accurate format. This is without a doubt, as Bob says, That is it. That is what I saw, exactly as I saw it. So there's no more gray zones. There's no more inconsistencies, or he might have said this, or did he say that? That's it. So at least it will provide, it will dot the I's, cross the T's, make sure everything is clear, and you finally get to see it. So, and you get at least a little entertained by it. I hope so, because we tried to make it as fun as possible. So that's number one. So I really hope people enjoy it. And we put a big emphasis on showing a little bit of Bob's past and present in his personal life, something that we've never seen before. He's was gracious enough to open up to us, show us a lot of things about back when he was a child, and then things that he does today, things that we haven't had the opportunity to see with Bob Lazar. And it's gonna certainly add a level of humanity to the man. He's not just a UFO guy. He's not just that guy who came out years ago and exposed Area 51. That's not really Bob Lazar. That was just a little piece of his life that just so happened to become a historical moment. But you'll get to see the man himself, the person, the human being behind this whole story. And there's even a scene in the film where there's a there's I don't want to say an emotional Bob Lazar, but you'll see a human Bob Lazar, and it's actually pretty cool to see that. So that's what you'll get in the film, and it'll be available on Amazon Video worldwide on April 3rd. You could rent it or purchase it, and it'll also be available on our new platform, which is going to be called WANA. We Are Not Alone, and on that platform, you will have the film. On Amazon, it'll be subtitled in multiple languages. On our platform, it'll be dubbed in 20 languages.
Oh,
So
wow.
you're going to have it in Mandarin, Cantonese, Vietnamese, Japanese, Russian, Polish, Italian, German, all those languages professionally dubbed on that platform. So it'll be cool for somebody outside of the North American territory to watch it in their own language.
That's really important, man. It does open this story up
Yeah.
globally because this is a global phenomenon and
Right.
mystery. So I
Yeah.
love that. I love that.
Yeah.
We will have links in the show notes to the
Excellent.
film on both your platform and Amazon as
Thank you.
well. But yeah, let's head over, get to these
Let's do it.
burning listener questions. But before we go, Luigi, thank you so much for joining us today here on Somewhere in the Skies.
Thank you, Ryan. It's a real pleasure. It was great to meet you as well.
Somewhere in the Skies is part of the Somewhere podcast universe. Please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. To learn more about all of our shows, visit thespu.com.